The hangar was thick with tension as the young pilots exchanged doubtful glances, their voices low but firm as they refused to let a lone woman take the Blackhawk's controls. "You're not cleared for this," one muttered, dismissing her with a smirk. What they didn't realize was that Mara Elliott wasn't just any pilot. She was a decorated veteran, an elite operator who had flown countless life-or-death missions in the world's most dangerous combat zones. Her silence spoke volumes, her scars and steady gaze hinting at stories buried deep beneath the surface. When the commanding officer quietly stepped forward, acknowledging her true identity, the pilot's smug confidence shattered. This was more than a test of skill. It was a powerful journey of respect reclaimed, a reminder that true strength often lives where it's least expected. Just a quick little pause before I forget. If you like this kind of stories of overcoming adversity and justice, please leave a like and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you're new here, consider subscribing to our channel so you don't miss tomorrow's special video. I guarantee you won't want to miss it. Now let's jump back in. The hangar doors stood wide, revealing the hulking silhouette of the UH-60 Black Hawk, its matte body catching what little light the overcast day allowed. Technicians moved around its landing gear, their voices muted by the drone of a nearby generator. Captain Mara Elliott stepped quietly onto the hangar floor. She didn't look like a visitor anyone was expecting. The jacket she wore was clean but frayed at the cuffs. Her boots bore fine cracks in the leather. She carried no papers, no visible rank. Just the way she walked, deliberate but unassuming, as if measuring each footstep. She was looking for someone specific, but before she could ask, a voice sliced through the mechanical hum. "Ma'am, you're not supposed to be back here." Lieutenant Brad Halvorsen emerged from behind the tail section, sunglasses resting on his head like a crown. His tone wasn't cruel, but it had that casual superiority of someone accustomed to being the most competent person in the room, or thinking so. "I'm here to see about flying her," Mara replied, her voice low, even. Brad paused, then grinned as if she'd just told the day's best joke. "Flying?" "The Black Hawk." He gestured toward the machine behind him. "Not a joyride, ma'am. This isn't a simulator." From across the hangar, a couple of crew members glanced over, drawn by the exchange. Mara noticed, but didn't shift her eyes from Brad. "I've flown her before," she said simply. Eric Vance, leaning against a workbench, chuckled. "In a video game?" Brad smirked, shaking his head. "Listen, I'm sure you're a great passenger, but the Army doesn't exactly hand over a $20 million bird to, well, anyone who walks in off the street." His words carried far enough for a few more heads to turn. Mara's hands stayed loose at her sides. The air seemed to thicken, though the tension was subtle, just a small pause in the movements of those around them. A soft clink came from inside her jacket as she shifted her weight. The compass. She kept her eyes on Brad, unreadable. Brad's grin widened as he stepped closer, planting himself firmly between Mara and the Black Hawk. The metallic scent of hydraulic fluid hung in the air, mingling with the faint tang of jet exhaust drifting from the tarmac outside. "Ma'am, I don't know what you think you're doing here, but even our trainees have more logged hours than most civilians could dream of. And you," he gestured vaguely at her, "the scuffed boots, the worn jacket, don't exactly scream aviator." Eric leaned over to Dana Hurst, murmuring something that made her press her lips together, fighting a smile. Mara didn't react. Her gaze flicked past Brad to the helicopter's rotor assembly, tracing the lines of its blade roots with quiet familiarity. A gust of wind rolled in through the open hangar, carrying with it the sound of another aircraft powering up in the distance. Brad followed her gaze and mistook it for idle curiosity. "That's the main rotor hub. Complicated stuff, probably more than you want to know." Michael Reyes, the young civilian apprentice, pretended to check a tool cart, but kept his eyes on Mara. Something about the way she'd looked at the rotor, not in awe, but as if silently checking it for faults, lodged in his mind. Mara finally spoke, her tone flat, almost too soft to catch. "The dampers on that hub, they're overdue." Brad blinked. "What?" "They've got about 80 more flight hours before they start binding," she said. "You'll feel it in the cyclic first." Her eyes came back to him, steady. "If you're paying attention." For a fraction of a second, the hangar seemed to go still. Brad laughed, a short, dismissive bark. "Right. And I suppose you learned that from a YouTube video." Mara didn't answer. She simply shifted her stance, hands behind her back, the posture oddly formal. The faintest glint of metal, the compass chain, peeked from her jacket as the wind teased it. Dana caught the glint, frowned slightly, then looked at Mara again, this time a bit longer. Brad sighed, shaking his head. All right, I'll play along. Why exactly do you think you should be anywhere near that bird's controls? Mara's eyes stayed calm, almost distant. Because you called me here. Brad's brows knit. I did no such. But her words lingered, heavier than the noise of the hangar around them. Brad's frown deepened, but before he could press, Mara stepped slightly to the side, giving him room as though she wasn't here to challenge anyone. Her voice, when she spoke again, was level, neither defensive nor eager to prove a point. I didn't come to argue, she said. I came to help. Her eyes swept the hangar, not hurriedly, but with the slow, deliberate motion of someone who took in details others missed. The faint shimmer of fuel residue near the skids. The way a toolbox sat open, wrenches laid out in perfect order, except for one, turned the wrong way. Even the way a ground crew member's headset cable was draped dangerously close to a moving tug wheel. Brad mistook her quiet survey for hesitation. Help, he said, smirking again. We're doing just fine without outside assistance. Mara's weight shifted imperceptibly onto the balls of her feet, her boots making the faintest scrape on the concrete. To anyone else, she looked like she was simply adjusting her stance. Michael Reyes, still feigning work, saw it differently, a pilot's ready posture. Not tense. Prepared. You're training for deployment? She asked. Brad tilted his head, eyes narrowing. And what's it to you? Mara's answer was simple. Because the weather's shifting. You'll be dealing with crosswinds and low cloud before you even clear the range. And that bird's fuel sensors are running 1.6% off. Not dangerous yet, but if you're running hot and heavy, you'll want to factor it. Eric glanced toward the instrument panel through the cockpit window, his easy grin faltering for a second. Dana, standing a few feet away, crossed her arms, watching Mara now with quiet interest. Brad gave a short laugh, but it didn't have the same bite as before. Lady, even if you're right, and I'm not saying you are, we're not in the habit of letting just anyone touch military hardware. Mara dipped her head slightly, not in submission, but in a way that carried its own gravity. I know. I remember the rules. Her hand went into her jacket pocket for just a moment, fingers brushing over the smooth-worn leather cord of the compass. Her thumb found the small notch near its rim, the one she'd carved herself, years ago, during a mission where that compass was the only thing that brought her home. She didn't pull it out yet. Not yet. Brad waited for her to say more, but Mara simply let the quiet stretch. It wasn't an awkward pause. It was a deliberate one, the kind that forced others to fill it. Her eyes weren't locked on him now. They wandered briefly to the far end of the hangar, where the storm light was starting to change, the sky thickening into darker shades of gray. Eric shifted against the workbench. You didn't answer him, he said. Who exactly are you? Mara glanced at him, then back to Brad. Nobody you need to worry about. Brad laughed, but there was an edge in it now. See, that's the thing. People who are nobody don't walk in here talking like they've been running pre-flight checks for a living. Still, Mara didn't rise to it. She didn't need to. Every movement was slow, efficient, without wasted energy. She took a few steps toward the side of the helicopter, not close enough to trigger an objection from the crew, but near enough that her eyes could follow the faint scoring on one of the rotor blades. Michael Reyes noticed her hands. Not fidgeting, not gesturing, just still, at her sides, fingers curled slightly in a way that spoke of muscle memory, the kind learned from holding controls for hours without rest. Mara spoke again, softer this time. The Black Hawk isn't a toy. She's not for show. And she's not for people who think the sky owes them anything. Her tone wasn't aimed at Brad, not exactly. It was something heavier, almost personal, like she was speaking to someone long gone. Brad took a step forward, his voice sharpening. So what? You're here to lecture us. Mara's gaze came back to him, steady, unflinching. No, I'm here because sooner or later, you're going to need someone who can bring her home when things go wrong. Eric smirked, trying to lighten the tension. And that's you. But Mara didn't answer. She let the silence do the work. And in that moment, the low hum of the generator, the metallic groan of the hangar door track, and the distant whine of another helicopter lifting off seemed louder than they should have been. Brad shook his head, breaking the moment. All right, lady. Whatever you say. But he looked away first. The sound of rain began to patter faintly on the tin roof, a light tapping that underscored the stillness between the voices. Dana Hurst kept her arms crossed, her weight shifting from one leg to the other. The longer she watched, the more something about this felt off. Mara wasn't acting like the others who sometimes wandered in, the enthusiasts who wanted a selfie in the cockpit, or the veterans who came to reminisce loudly about their day. Those people were easy to read. They either gushed or tried to impress. Mara didn't do either. She just observed. Dana noticed the way Mara's eyes never stopped moving, not darting around nervously, but methodically scanning, the same way she herself had been trained to inspect a bird before a flight. And there was something else, the way Mara's posture stayed loose but balanced, never collapsing inward, never tensing outward. Michael Reyes was feeling it too. He kept pretending to sort a drawer of torque wrenches, but his ears tracked every word. That comment Mara made about the fuel sensors still stuck with him. Only a handful of people on base even knew about the minor drift in those readings. It wasn't something you'd guess without experience. Brad, though, didn't seem to notice the shift. He leaned toward Eric with a smirk. You ever see somebody so sure they belong somewhere they obviously don't? Dana caught the comment, her eyes narrowing slightly. She wasn't a confrontational person, but she also didn't like cheap shots, especially not when someone hadn't actually done anything wrong. Mara, for her part, gave no sign she'd heard. She stood with her hands clasped loosely in front of her, gaze turned toward the Black Hawk, as though she were quietly weighing something in her mind. Another crew member passed through, slowed briefly to look at her, then moved on, but even that glance carried a flicker of curiosity. Dana finally broke her silence, directing her voice toward Brad without looking at him. You ever think maybe she knows more than she's saying? Brad laughed, but it felt forced. Sure. Maybe she's the president in disguise, too. Dana didn't answer. She just kept watching Mara, trying to puzzle her out, because something told her this woman wasn't here by accident. The rain outside thickened, a steady hiss against the hangar's metal skin. Somewhere beyond the open doors, thunder rumbled, not sharp yet, but rolling, like distant artillery. Brad and Eric kept their easy postures, but Dana noticed the subtle change in the air. A couple of younger mechanics had stopped what they were doing entirely, leaning casually against tool carts as though they had all the time in the world. Their eyes kept sliding toward Mara. Michael Reyes finally gave up pretending to work and stood beside a rolling parts bin, arms resting across the top. He wasn't smiling, but there was a spark of curiosity there now. Brad looked around at the growing attention. What? You all act like she's a celebrity or something. No, Michael said slowly. Just, not every day someone walks in and starts calling out rotor hub hours and fuel sensor drift. Brad chuckled, shaking his head. Lucky guess. Anyone can read maintenance logs. Mara's eyes shifted toward him, calm as ever. Logs don't tell you when the blades are starting to talk. Eric frowned slightly. The blades talk. She gave a small nod. If you've flown them long enough, you hear it. The way the wind starts to play against the cord line, just before a problem. Her voice was low, almost conversational, but it had the effect of pulling the room in closer. Even the hum of the generator seemed quieter. Dana's gaze moved from Mara to the Black Hawk and back again. There was no cockiness in Mara's tone, no desire to impress. Just truth, spoken like a fact of nature. Brad exhaled sharply, trying to break the moment. All right, so you've got some poetic ideas about rotor blades. That still doesn't put you in the pilot's seat. Mara didn't answer, just glanced toward the storm again. Her thumb brushed that worn notch in the compass still hidden in her pocket, and for an instant, her eyes softened, not at Brad, but at some far-off memory. That fleeting look, that mix of distance and weight, made Dana's stomach tighten. Whatever this woman had seen, it wasn't something you came back from entirely. A sudden gust pushed rain into the hangar's mouth, the drops tapping against the polished side of the Black Hawk. The smell of wet asphalt crept in. Mara didn't flinch at the shift in weather. She just tilted her head slightly, gauging the wind the way a farmer might before a storm. Michael broke the silence. You've flown in worse weather, haven't you? She didn't look at him, but there was the faintest curve at the corner of her mouth. Everyone has their storms. The words were quiet, and the way she said them wasn't casual. Brad rolled his eyes, muttering under his breath, "Here we go." Dana caught that, and shot him a quick glare. She turned back to Mara. What kind of storms? Mara's gaze stayed on the rain. The kind you can't outfly. She took a step toward the helicopter's nose, her hand lightly brushing the cold metal as she passed. Her fingertips paused on a faint patch of repaired skin just under the cockpit window. Her eyes softened, and for a heartbeat the hangar faded. The sunlight was blinding in that other place. The rotor wash kicked up walls of dust, stinging her eyes as she gripped the cyclic, the compass vibrating against the dash with every shudder of the bird. The fuel gauge danced just enough to make her stomach tighten. A voice crackled in her headset, younger, warm, certain. "I'll cover you, sis. Get them out." Then, a streak across the sky. The shriek of an incoming RPG. She blinked. The dust was gone. The hangar was back. Her fingers left the scarred patch of skin on the Black Hawk's body. No one spoke. Not because they understood. They didn't. But because something in her expression made them instinctively avoid breaking the moment. Brad shifted, like he wanted to cut the tension but wasn't sure how. Dana's eyes stayed on Mara now, searching, uneasy. Michael's grip on the parts bin tightened. Something had happened to this woman. And whatever it was, it still lived in her. The rain outside steadied into a curtain, drumming against the hangar roof in a rhythm that almost masked the low hum of the generator. Brad cleared his throat, trying to reset the tone. "All right, let's just cut to it. You can't just walk in here and... You flew her in Cunard, didn't you?" Michael's voice cut clean through his. All eyes turned to the young apprentice. His tone wasn't mocking, it was certain. Mara didn't answer. Not with words. She simply looked at him, and something in that gaze told him everything he needed. Brad's laugh came too quickly. "Oh, come on. You think she was flying combat missions? What is she, 60? Dana shot him a look sharp enough to make him stop. Cunard's not a name you just pull out of thin air. Michael stepped out from behind the parts bin, his hands resting in his jacket pockets. "My cousin served there. Same province. They lost a lot of pilots." Mara's eyes flickered, just for a second, toward the compass in her pocket, a reflex she didn't quite hide in time. Michael noticed. He took a step closer. "That's why you knew about the patch on the skin," he said quietly. "You were there when it happened." Brad's smirk had slipped entirely now. "Even if she was, that doesn't mean..." "Doesn't mean what?" Dana cut in. "That she knows more about this bird than you? That maybe she's done things you'll never have to." The hangar felt smaller somehow, the air heavier. Outside, lightning flashed faintly in the distance, the light reflecting in the helicopter's windshield. Mara finally broke the silence, her voice calm, even. "I didn't come here for credit. I didn't come here to take anything from you. But I was asked to be here, and when the time comes, you'll understand why." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise, spoken with the quiet certainty of someone who'd kept far worse ones. The room stayed still after she spoke, the rain and distant thunder the only sounds. The rain's steady rhythm on the roof was almost hypnotic now, but inside the hangar the air felt charged, like a wire stretched too tight. A few of the younger mechanics had stopped pretending to work altogether. They stood in the open, eyes flicking between Mara and the pilots. Brad crossed his arms, posture stiffening as if to reassert control. "Look, I don't know what game you're playing, but I've got a flight block in 20 minutes. This isn't the time or place for..." His eyes darted briefly toward Dana, then back to Mara. "Stories." Mara didn't flinch at the dismissal. Her attention had drifted toward a wall-mounted bulletin board near the tool cabinets, the kind plastered with base announcements, training schedules, and, near the top, a faded photograph. She walked toward it, not hurriedly, not like she was making a point, just steady steps. The crew watched her pass, the sound of her boots soft against the concrete. The photograph was a grainy shot, clearly taken in the field. Two Black Hawks on a rugged mountainside, one rotor bent and battered, the other throwing up a plume of dust as it lifted. Figures stood in the foreground, helmets on, goggles down, uniforms coated in grit. The caption beneath it read, 160th SOAR, Extraction, Cunard Province, 2010. Dana followed her gaze and caught something most others wouldn't have noticed. One of the helmeted figures, visor half lifted, a faint but unmistakable scar tracing the line of the jaw. Her eyes flicked to Mara, same scar, same slope of the shoulders. "Is that you?" Dana asked softly, almost like she didn't want to break whatever spell was hanging over the space. Mara didn't answer. She didn't even look at Dana. Her hand slipped into her jacket pocket, fingers curling around the leather cord. Slowly, she drew it out. The compass swung gently in the air between her fingers, its brass body scratched and dulled by years of use. The initials carved into its rim were almost invisible now, J. Michael's eyes locked on it, his voice catching in his throat. That's... He didn't finish, but his gaze was sharp, almost reverent, as if the truth were sitting right there in front of him, just out of reach. Brad looked between them, his unease finally visible. All right, what is this? Some relic from a surplus store? Mara closed her fist around the compass. It's from someone who never came home. Her voice was low but clear, and it silenced the hangar more completely than any shout could have. No one pressed her. They didn't need to. The weight in her words, the way she held herself, was the closest thing to an answer they were going to get. The heavy silence hung like a thick fog in the hangar, the compass swinging gently in Mara's palm. Brad's jaw tightened as his usual smirk faded, replaced by a look Mara had seen countless times before, defiance masked by uncertainty. So, Brad began, voice sharper now. You expect us to just hand over the controls because you showed us a rusty old compass and a blurry photo? He stepped forward, the authority in his tone unmistakable. If you really think you're still qualified to fly this bird, prove it. I'm not saying it because I want to embarrass you, but because you've got to earn it. Everyone here does. Eric chimed in with a low chuckle. Yeah, Captain Nobody. Show us you can actually handle the Black Hawk before we start bowing down. The crowd's atmosphere shifted palpably. A few younger mechanics glanced nervously between Mara and the pilots, sensing the storm brewing beyond the clouds. Dana's eyes narrowed, uncomfortable with the growing tension but unwilling to break Mara's side. Mara's grip tightened on the compass for just a moment before she raised her head, her gaze calm and unwavering. When we're done, she said quietly, you'll apologize. Not for doubting me, for underestimating what you don't see. Her voice carried no bravado, no arrogance, just a quiet confidence forged by years of experience and the weight of loss carried silently beneath the surface. Brad's face flushed with a mix of frustration and something bordering on respect, though neither man would admit it out loud. Fine, he said finally, lowering his voice so only those close could hear. You get the controls. But no mistakes. One slip up, and this conversation is over. Mara nodded once. No mistakes. The room seemed to exhale collectively as the unspoken challenge settled into the air. Eyes locked onto Mara as the moment stretched. Heavy, expectant. Dana shifted beside Michael, who gave a subtle nod as if to say, this is real. Brad gestured toward the helicopter with a grudging sweep of his arm. Step up, Captain. Mara moved toward the Black Hawk with steady, deliberate steps. The worn compass still swinging lightly from her fingers, a symbol not just of navigation but of something deeper, history, resilience, and an unspoken promise. Outside, the storm was drawing closer, thunder rolling low beneath the distant growl of engines. The hangar seemed to hold its breath, the thick scent of oil and machinery hanging in the air as Mara stepped forward. Each of her footsteps echoed softly against the concrete floor, a steady cadence that broke the heavy silence like a pulse. The gathered crowd, pilots, crew members, apprentices, watched with a mixture of skepticism and growing intrigue. Brad's eyes never left her, narrowing with a blend of defiance and unease. His arms remained crossed, the stance of a man guarding fragile authority. All right, he said, voice low but carrying the edge of command. You get the controls. But know this, any mistake, and this ends. No second chances. Mara's gaze met his without flinching. There was no fire in her eyes, no need to prove herself with words. Instead, she simply nodded once, a quiet, deliberate acceptance of the challenge. She moved around the massive Black Hawk with practiced ease, her fingers grazing the cold metal frame as she approached the cockpit. The worn leather of her jacket creaked faintly, blending with the hum of nearby generators and distant jet engines. Sliding open the cockpit door, Mara settled into the pilot's seat, a place she knew like the lines on her weathered hands. Her fingers ran along the control stick, tracing the familiar contours with a reverence that spoke of years spent in flight, years of grit, loss, and survival. The cockpit smelled of fuel, electronics, and cold metal. a scent that wrapped around her like an old friend welcoming her home. Brad stood just outside the canopy, his eyes flickering between the instrument panel and Mara's calm demeanor. His voice tightened as he warned, "We're watching. One wrong move, and you're done." Mara didn't respond. Instead, she began methodically running through the pre-flight checks, her motions precise and controlled. Each switch she flipped, each gauge she read, was deliberate, showing not just familiarity, but mastery. The subtle clicks and whirs of the helicopter's systems powered up in rhythm with her focused breathing. Outside the cockpit, Dana and Michael exchanged looks, curiosity softening into something close to respect. Michael whispered, "I'm starting to believe there's more to her than we thought." The distant sound of thunder rolled over the base, low and ominous, mirroring the storm gathering both in the sky and in the tense atmosphere of the hangar. The clouds thickened, casting shadows that darkened the tarmac and amplified the weight of the moment. Brad exhaled sharply, the rigid mask of confidence slipping for the first time. "You're good. Too good to be some random visitor." Mara said nothing. She adjusted the headset, her fingers steady but firm as she reached up and unclasped the compass from around her neck, letting it rest against her chest like a silent reminder of why she was here. Eric shifted his weight, voice low as if sharing a secret with no one in particular. "It's not just the flying, it's the way she carries herself. There's history in that calm." Another clap of thunder echoed, louder this time, shaking the hangar doors and quickening every heartbeat inside. Mara closed her eyes briefly, taking a deep breath before opening them with renewed focus. She keyed the radio mic and said, steady and clear, "Ready for takeoff." The room held still. No one dared to blink. As the tension thickened, waiting for the moment Mara would prove everything without saying a word. The low rumble of engines in the distance mingled with the steady tapping of rain against the hangar roof, creating a rhythm that seemed to slow time itself. Inside the cavernous space, a hush had fallen, a silence born not from absence of sound, but from the thick anticipation hanging in the air. Mara sat poised in the Black Hawk's cockpit, her body a study in controlled stillness. Her fingers hovered lightly over the instruments, barely moving, yet holding the promise of sudden, precise action. Every breath she took was measured, deep but quiet, as if she were drawing in strength from some hidden well within. The canopy's glass reflected the flickering overhead lights, catching the compass resting against her chest, a talisman carved by time and memory. The brass gleamed faintly, worn edges softened by years of handling, a silent witness to journeys both physical and emotional. Outside, Brad's sharp gaze never left the cockpit. His usual bravado was tempered by an unmistakable edge of wariness. "You're not just doing this for show," he muttered, half to himself. Dana stood a little apart, arms crossed but eyes wide, absorbing every detail of Mara's preparation. The way her back straightened subtly, the slight tightening around her jaw, the steady blink that seemed to ward off ghosts only she could see. Michael's attention was fixed on the controls Mara was running through with a quiet precision. She's done this before. Not once, not twice, but enough times to know it by heart. Mara's lips pressed into a thin line as she cycled through the final systems check. She tapped the comm switch, voice steady but low. "Control, this is Eagle 1. Systems nominal. Standing by for clearance." The room seemed to shrink, the weight of the moment pressing down like the storm clouds gathering just outside. Thunder rumbled again, low and distant, as if nature itself was holding its breath in solidarity. Brad shifted, breaking the silence with a reluctant nod. "Clearance granted. Show us what you've got." Mara's eyes flicked upward briefly, not in arrogance, but with the quiet fire of someone who has seen more than most and lived to come back stronger. She gripped the cyclic with a steady hand, the Black Hawk's engine thrumming to life beneath her fingertips, a deep vibration that traveled through her bones. Around the hangar, the onlookers tensed, bracing for the moment when history, skill, and quiet dignity would converge in one undeniable truth. The storm outside had grown louder, rain hammering the hangar's corrugated roof like a drum roll announcing a long-awaited moment. Yet inside the cavernous space, time itself seemed to slow, stretched taut between the steady breath Mara drew and the soft hum of the Black Hawk's engines. She sat in the cockpit, every muscle taut but controlled, like a predator coiled, not in anger or aggression, but in calm readiness. Her eyes flicked over every gauge, every indicator with the practiced gaze of someone who knew this machine's language as intimately as her own. This was not a flight test. This was a conversation between a warrior and her instrument, years of history and trauma woven into every touch. Her hands moved deliberately now, adjusting switches and dials with an almost reverent precision. The worn leather of her gloves whispered softly against the cold metal, a tactile link between past and present. She glanced once at the compass hanging from her neck, the brass dulled by time, and then tucked it back beneath her jacket, a silent promise to herself and to the ghost she carried. The crew around her held their collective breath, watching a transformation unfold. Mara's presence shifted subtly but unmistakably, the weight of experience settling over her like armor, a quiet authority that demanded attention without a word. Dana felt it too, the hairs on her arms rising as she sensed the invisible thread binding Mara and the Black Hawk. It wasn't just the machine's power, it was the history, the blood, the countless missions flown into hell and back. Michael exchanged a glance with Dana, whispering, "She's no ordinary pilot. This is someone who's been to the edge and returned." Brad, standing slightly apart now, swallowed hard. The smug confidence he'd worn since Mara's arrival was cracking under the pressure of undeniable truth. His hands clenched briefly at his sides, but his voice stayed steady. "You've got the floor. Show us what you're made of." Mara's gaze flicked to him once, not with challenge, but with quiet resolve. She keyed the comms microphone again, voice low but clear. "Tower, Eagle 1 requesting immediate takeoff clearance." The distant thunder rolled again, the storm's fury a fitting soundtrack to what was about to unfold. She adjusted her headset, her eyes narrowing just slightly as the first notes of engine pitch shifted. The bird vibrated beneath her, alive and responsive, waiting. In this charged silence, Mara wasn't just a pilot preparing to fly. She was a guardian standing at the edge of a precipice, ready to reclaim her dignity not with fury, but with the precision and presence born from decades of silent strength. The clearance crackled softly through the headset. Mara's fingers tightened around the cyclic, her breath steady despite the weight of all eyes on her. Outside, the storm's fury grew, rain hammering the tarmac like a relentless drumbeat, but inside the cockpit, time slowed, every second stretching with quiet intensity. She eased the throttle forward. The engine responded immediately, a low, powerful growl rising beneath her hands. The Black Hawk began to hum, alive and impatient. The rotors picked up speed, slicing through the humid air with a steady, measured rhythm. Brad and the others watched in silence, the smirks and dismissive glances replaced by wide-eyed focus. The younger mechanics leaned in, some gripping toolboxes or railings as though steadying themselves against an unseen force. Mara's gaze flicked over the instruments with surgical precision. Every dial, every gauge was monitored with unyielding discipline. This was more than a demonstration. It was a reclaiming of something stolen: respect, trust, and truth. With practiced grace, she released the parking brake. The helicopter began to roll forward slowly, the vibrations resonating deep in her bones. The roar of the rotors filled the hangar as she lifted the collective, feeling the bird respond beneath her, powerful yet precise. Outside, the storm's lightning illuminated the sky, casting fleeting shadows on the aircraft's sleek frame. Mara's posture was impeccable, every movement calculated, every command exact. There was no desperation, no need for theatrics. Just the quiet mastery of a veteran who had flown through far worse. Brad's jaw clenched. His eyes betrayed disbelief. The pilot they had scorned was no pretender. She was a force of nature. The helicopter ascended steadily, clearing the hangar doors with inches to spare. The rain whipped past the open cockpit, cold and sharp, but Mara remained undeterred. As she leveled off, her voice came over the comms again, calm and resolute. Eagle 1 airborne, ready to proceed with mission parameters. A hush fell over the observers, the realization dawning slowly. This was no ordinary flight. This was a rescue mission, and Mara was the guardian they hadn't known they needed. The Black Hawk banked gently, slicing through the storm with precision and power, leaving behind the doubts and shadows that had filled the hangar moments before. The thunder from the receding storm was a distant murmur as the Black Hawk vanished beyond the hangar's open doors. Inside, a profound silence settled over the room, thick, heavy, and charged with the weight of what had just unfolded. Brad stood motionless, the usual cocky defiance stripped away, replaced by disbelief so raw it was almost palpable. His eyes were wide, his mouth slightly agape, struggling to form words. Finally, a breath escaped him, trembling and unsteady. She's the real deal. The stories weren't wrong. Michael's gaze was fixed on the empty cockpit, a mixture of reverence and shock in his eyes. That was flawless, he said softly, like watching a ghost from the legends. There's no way she's just some random veteran. Dana's heart hammered in her chest as she looked around at the faces of her peers. The earlier skepticism had dissolved into something else entirely. Awe, respect, maybe even regret. The woman they had ignored, dismissed, and humiliated had just flown that helicopter with a mastery none of them could deny. One of the younger mechanics, barely more than a boy, whispered under his breath, "That's not just a pilot. That's a warrior." His words echoed around the room, breaking the silence in a way that felt almost sacred. Then, from near the back, a voice, quiet, hesitant, but resolute, broke through the stillness. That's Captain Mara Elliott. The one they said was missing in action from Cunner years ago. A ripple passed through the crowd as everyone turned toward the speaker. The name hung in the air, heavy with memory and unspoken pain. Mara's scar, the compass initials J, the photo on the bulletin board, everything suddenly aligned. Dana's eyes narrowed, a mixture of understanding and sorrow washing over her. The woman who had been so thoroughly underestimated was not only a veteran but a legend, a ghost from a brutal chapter none wanted to speak of. Brad swallowed hard, his earlier bravado crumbling completely. His shoulders sagged as the weight of his mistake settled in. "We never should have doubted her," he admitted quietly, almost ashamed. Across the hangar, whispers began to stir, apologies unspoken but felt deeply. Respect, once withheld, was now demanded by the sheer presence of truth. The crowd's perception shifted, from doubt to reverence, from dismissal to honor. In that charged silence, the legacy of a warrior who had been forgotten was reclaimed, not with a loud boast, but with quiet dignity and undeniable skill. The room held a collective breath, each person changed by what they had just witnessed. Mara Elliott wasn't just a pilot. She was history. She was strength. And she had flown in to remind them all of that truth. The moment Mara lifted off and disappeared beyond the storm, the hangar remained still as if holding its breath. The heavy silence stretched out, thick and palpable, refusing to break easily. It wasn't just the absence of the helicopter's roar. It was the weight of a truth finally acknowledged, a quiet reckoning settling over every person in that room. Brad lingered near the hangar door, his figure silhouetted against the fading light outside. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by a gravity born of realization. His eyes didn't meet anyone's. Instead, they stared blankly at the concrete floor as if grappling with the magnitude of what had just transpired. For years, he had worn confidence like armor, but now it felt fragile and insufficient. Dana, standing a few feet away, watched him with a softer expression. She stepped forward cautiously, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "You didn't have to prove anything to us," she said quietly, voice tentative but genuine. "We should have seen who you were from the start." Mara's expression softened, the faintest crease of a smile touching her lips. It was not triumph, but acceptance, a quiet grace born of enduring hardship and carrying burdens unseen. "I didn't come here for approval," she said simply. "I came because it was my duty. That's all." Michael moved closer, offering a hand extended in respect. "Thank you for showing us what real strength looks like. Not just flying skills, but resilience. Humility." Mara accepted the handshake without hesitation. Her fingers brushed the compass hanging around her neck, a weathered talisman bearing initials faded by time. A symbol of journeys not just through skies, but through memories, loss, and silent sacrifice. It was a reminder of who she was beneath the uniform and the judgment. Around them, the crew shifted, the tension melting into something warmer, a tentative camaraderie born of understanding. Conversations sparked quietly, eyes meeting with new respect. The lessons learned that day were not from lectures or orders, but from presence, the quiet power of a veteran reclaiming her story. Brad finally looked up, voice low but steady. "If you ever want to come back, we'd be honored." Mara nodded, steady and firm. "When the time comes." Her words carried the weight of experience, a promise without boast or demand. Outside, the storm clouds began to part, letting in soft, filtered light that fell gently across the hangar floor. It was as if the world itself acknowledged the transformation, a moment of dignity reclaimed, not through violence or pride, but through calm strength and unwavering resolve. Mara gathered her belongings slowly, deliberately, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who had endured and returned, changed but unbroken. There was no need for fanfare, no desire for applause. The room had witnessed something far greater than a display of skill, the reclaiming of respect and the restoration of legacy. The murmur that had started as a hesitant whisper near the back of the hangar quickly swelled into a wave of recognition and astonishment. The name, spoken quietly at first, echoed through the room. Captain Mara Elliott. The legendary pilot once declared missing in action during a harrowing operation in Kinner. The very mention of her name sent a ripple through the crowd, breaking the dense silence like a floodgate opening. Dana's eyes scanned the faces around her, incredulous, wide-eyed, some pale with disbelief. Others exchanged furtive glances, piecing together fragments of stories and rumors they'd only heard in passing. The vanished rescue mission, the squad left behind, the unanswered calls for help. All of it suddenly took form and meaning. The scar tracing Mara's jawline, the faded compass dangling around her neck, the quiet command in her eyes. These were no longer just symbols of a mysterious past, but badges of survival and courage. The woman they had scorned was not a forgotten nobody. She was a warrior who had stared into the abyss and returned. Brad's usual swagger was gone. His face was shadowed with the weight of regret and realization. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion and humility. "We judged her without knowing her story, without seeing the battles she fought, both out there and inside herself. We were wrong." Michael nodded, his tone sober and respectful. "She's not just a pilot. She's a legend. And we treated her like she was invisible." Around them, the younger crew members, some still stunned, began to share what little they knew from old veterans. Tales of Mara's unyielding bravery under fire, her cool-headed leadership in moments of chaos, and the silent way she carried the weight of loss and responsibility. The hangar, once tense with doubt, now brimmed with a reverent energy. The atmosphere softened further as one of the senior instructors stepped forward. His voice was steady, carrying the authority of years of experience. "What we witnessed today was not just skill or strength. It was the embodiment of sacrifice, resilience, and honor. Captain Mara Elliott is a guardian, a protector who never gave up, even when the world forgot." Brad approached her, extending a hand with genuine respect and remorse. "Captain Elliott, I owe you my deepest apology." Mara met his gaze, her eyes steady and calm. She accepted the gesture with a subtle nod, her demeanor reflecting the dignity of someone who carried scars deeper than the eye could see. She said nothing, but her presence spoke volumes. Grace without bitterness, strength without boastfulness. As the crowd began to disperse, quiet conversations floated around the room. People reflected on how easily strength could be hidden beneath silence, how assumptions had clouded their judgment, and how critical it was to honor those who serve in the shadows. Outside, the storm had cleared, leaving behind a sky washed clean and calm. The sunlight spilled into the hangar, illuminating Mara's figure as she stood tall, not just as a pilot, but as a legacy reclaimed through truth and quiet power. The tension that had gripped the hangar all day began to ease, replaced by a quiet reverence that settled over those still gathered. Mara stood near the far wall, her figure calm and composed as the soft light from the clearing sky bathed the space. The storm outside had passed, but within the walls of the hangar, something deeper had shifted, a restoration of respect, a reclamation of dignity long denied. Brad approached her cautiously, no longer wearing the armor of skepticism and bravado. His voice was low and sincere, stripped of the earlier arrogance. "You didn't need to prove yourself today. We were wrong to judge before knowing your story." Mara met his gaze with a quiet strength that seemed to hold decades of hardship in its depths. Respect is earned, she replied evenly, her words measured but powerful. Not given lightly. It comes from endurance, from actions taken when no one's watching. Her voice carried no bitterness, only the firm conviction of one who has weathered storms far beyond this moment. Dana and Michael lingered nearby, watching the exchange unfold. Dana whispered softly, "Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones fought in silence, battles no one ever sees." Mara's fingers brushed the worn compass hanging beneath her jacket, its brass surface dulled by time and memory. There are many who serve unseen, carrying burdens the world forgets. The quiet sacrifices rarely make the headlines, but they shape us all. Brad nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of her words. We owe it to them, to look deeper, to honor what's hidden beneath the surface. There was no triumph in Mara's demeanor, no desire for vengeance or prideful victory. Instead, her presence radiated a profound grace, a testament to resilience and humility. She embodied the quiet strength that turns pain and loss into unwavering resolve. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, spilling warm light into the hangar and illuminating the faces of those who had witnessed the transformation. The air was lighter now, filled with hope and a newfound respect that promised to echo beyond these walls. As Mara gathered her belongings with deliberate care, preparing to leave, the room seemed to hold a collective breath. She wasn't just a pilot who had proved herself today. She was a living example of dignity reclaimed through truth and perseverance. Her footsteps were steady, confident, not rushed, but purposeful. She walked out of the hangar, leaving behind more than just a story. She left behind a legacy of resilience, grace, and the power of silent strength. 3 months had passed since that stormy day in the hangar. The old airfield, once marked by tension and quiet doubt, now hummed with a different energy. Mara Elliott was no longer just a figure of whispered legend. She had become a guiding presence, a quiet force shaping a new generation. The training room, once a place of skepticism, had transformed. New posters adorned the walls, images of resilience, honor, and history. Among them, a framed photo of Mara in flight, her calm gaze captured forever against a backdrop of turbulent skies. It was a reminder to all who passed through that strength often came from unseen battles. Brad stood near the briefing table, his posture less guarded, his demeanor softer. He was no longer the brash skeptic, but a student in a larger story, one of humility and growth. She changed the way we see things, he admitted quietly to a group of trainees. Not by words, but by living it. Dana, now assisting Mara with training newcomers, moved with the ease of someone who had learned lessons far beyond textbook drills. It's not about proving yourself to others, she told a new recruit. It's about showing up with integrity every single day. Mara herself was rarely loud. She spoke softly, her presence commanding respect without demanding it. She carried the weight of her past, but did not let it define her. The compass she wore remained tucked beneath her jacket, a symbol not just of navigation, but of the journey that had brought her here and the quiet strength that guided her still. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Mara stood alone on the tarmac. The fading light painted the sky in hues of gold and crimson, a mirror to the storms she'd weathered and the peace she now sought. Her thoughts drifted briefly to the men and women she had once rescued, the silent promises she kept to them still alive in her heart. Brad approached quietly, standing beside her without interruption. "Thank you," he said simply. Mara nodded, her eyes never leaving the horizon. "We all have a role to play," she replied. "It's up to us how we carry it." As darkness settled, the stars began to emerge, distant, steady lights in the vast sky. Mara smiled faintly, the weight of her legacy both a burden and a gift. She had reclaimed her story, not through loud declarations or revenge, but through enduring presence, humility, and unwavering grace. The story of Captain Mara Elliott was no longer one of forgotten sacrifice. It was a testament, a quiet beacon for all who serve in shadows, waiting for their moment to be seen. Thank you for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and share your thoughts below. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Stay tuned for more immersive tactical stories.